In the thick air of midsummer, Baltimore's streets carried the restless hum of traffic and the smell of asphalt that had baked all day under the July sun. At 11 p.m, the city was restless but subdued, caught between neon glow and shadow. A police cruiser followed a small car that had been weaving through lanes too quickly, its taillights sharp against the dark. The stop was routine, unremarkable at first glance. Officer Daniels pulled the vehicle over near the edge of a quiet neighborhood where row houses leaned close together, their windows sealed tight against the heat. Inside the car sat Nicole Johnson, 33 years old, her eyes unfocused, her movements jittery. In the passenger seat, another woman sat silently, hands folded in her lap, her presence more shadow than voice. Body cameras recorded every detail. The clipped tone of the officer as he approached. The shuffle of Nicole's belongings spilling across the back seat. Blankets, plastic bags, boxes, pressed together so tightly, the car seemed more storage unit than vehicle. The hum of cicadas filled the silence between questions and answers. Daniels had seen worse cars, burdened with lives lived on the road, drivers caught between poverty and circumstance. He decided the night did not need to escalate. He would call for a tow, let the women walk away. The gesture was lenient, meant to diffuse, not inflame. But as he waited for dispatch to confirm the tow truck, a dissonance lingered. Nicole's breathing was too fast, her fingers too restless on the wheel. She shifted, glanced at the officer, and said a line so strange it froze the rhythm of the night. "It's fine. You'll see me on the news tomorrow." The words hung in the air, suspended between warning and confession. Daniels felt his stomach tighten, though protocol pushed him forward. People said strange things under stress, threats, jokes, ramblings that meant nothing. Still, the phrase lodged itself in his mind like a splinter. Tomorrow. News. He instructed her to collect what she needed before the tow. Nicole opened the door, her passenger following in silence. The sound of the trunk latch releasing echoed unnaturally loud. Daniels glanced back toward the car, already stepping closer. What began as a simple traffic stop was about to unravel into something no training manual had prepared him for. The officer's flashlight beam swept across the pavement as Nicole moved to the rear of the car. The circle of light caught her face. Tense lips pressed into a thin line as though she carried words she dared not speak. The passenger remained quiet, leaning heavily against the vehicle, her profile blurred by shadow. Daniels asked again if she needed assistance. Nicole shook her head, muttering that she only wanted a few items. Her voice was dry, rasping, as though strained by sleepless nights. Then, almost as an afterthought, she repeated the words that had unsettled him. "You'll see me on the news tomorrow." The phrase was not shouted, not even spoken with emphasis. It was delivered softly, almost resigned, as though the outcome had already been decided. Daniels froze for a moment, instinctive caution rising. He studied her posture, no aggression, no sudden movement, but something else, a certainty, heavy and unnatural. The night around them seemed to hold its breath. A breeze carried the faint odor of damp fabric from inside the car, but beneath it lingered something sour, faint enough to dismiss, yet strong enough to notice. He shifted closer, the beam of his light falling on a pile of clothes pressed against the back window. Nicole continued, talking a stream of disjointed explanations. She said she had nowhere to live, that she had been sleeping in her car, that everything she owned was inside. The words came quickly, as if rehearsed, as if layers of excuses had been stacked to form a barrier against further questions. Her hands trembled as she reached for the trunk. Her passenger lowered her gaze, refusing to meet the officer's eyes. Daniels felt the dissonance grow sharper. Two women, a cluttered car, and a remark that refused to release its grip on his thoughts. He called his partner over. Together they stepped nearer, the sound of their boots striking the asphalt in measured rhythm. Nicole hesitated, one hand on the trunk handle, the other gripping her shirt. For a long moment, she did not move, her body caught between compliance and collapse. Finally, the latch clicked. The trunk rose with a creak, releasing a gust of stale trapped air. It carried with it a smell that erased any lingering thought that this was routine. The first breath of air from the trunk struck with a weight that words could not soften. It was not the damp odour of old laundry, nor the sour tang of food long forgotten. It was deeper, heavier, an unmistakable stench that clung to the throat, that made even the most seasoned officer flinch. Daniels recoiled slightly, his light sweeping over the contents. At first glance, it was chaos bags upon bags, stacked haphazardly, plastic stretched white at the seams. A blanket stiff with grime covered a mound of belongings. He leaned closer, careful, his nostrils twitching at the acrid rot that rose in waves. He called his partner Officer Ramirez, who stepped forward with hesitation. Ramirez inhaled once, then stepped back, his face tightening as he whispered, "That's not garbage." Nicole fumbled with the bags, pulling at one, then another, her words tumbling too fast. She said they were only clothes, only things she had packed while moving from place to place. Her hands shook. Her eyes darted from one officer to the other, gauging their reactions. Daniel's pressed voice firmer now, instructing her to open the bags. Each layer peeled away with a crinkle of plastic, each movement drawing the odour sharper. The flashlight beam caught the shine of duct tape, the dark stain of something that had seeped through fabric and dried long ago. Ramirez turned his face aside, muttering a prayer beneath his breath. The cicadas outside seemed louder now, as if the night itself strained to fill the silence that followed each rip of plastic. Nicole's passenger shifted against the car, her body rigid, eyes closed, lips pressed together, as though bracing for what would come. Daniel steadied his breathing. His fingers hovered above a black suitcase wedged beneath the mound. The zipper was half-broken teeth bent where someone had forced it shut. He glanced at Nicole. Her expression fractured, part defiance, part pleading, part something he could not name. He ordered her to open it. Nicole stalled, muttering incoherent protests, fumbling with the zipper. The officers leaned closer. The smell was now overwhelming, metallic and sweet, as if the air itself carried the memory of decay. When the suitcase was finally tugged free and unzipped, the night changed forever. The zipper's teeth split open with a rasping sound that seemed louder than it should have been, echoing in the quiet street. Daniels raised his flashlight, its circle of light trembling slightly against the dark fabric. Nicole's fingers hesitated at the halfway mark knuckles, white breath coming in ragged bursts. Then the suitcase sagged open. Ramirez drew in a sharp breath and stumbled backward, one hand pressed to his mouth. Daniels felt his stomach twist, the odor so powerful now it seemed to coat his skin, sinking into the fibers of his uniform. Inside, tangled among stained clothing, lay the unmistakable form of a child. The remains were small, shrunken, the skin waxen and fragile, clinging to bone. At first glance, the size suggested a toddler. But Daniel's training whispered the truth. This was not the body of one recently lost. The bones were too prominent, the features too eroded by time. Nicole cried out, a high, keening sound that split the night. She staggered backward, repeating the same words over and over. "I didn't know. I didn't know." Her voice cracked the syllables, slipping into sobs. Ramirez turned away, pressing both hands against the trunk of the car, whispering fragments of prayer between shallow breaths. Daniels, though his own chest heaved with nausea, kept his light steady. His duty demanded clarity even in horror. He asked Nicole again, calm, firm, who the child was. She did not answer. Instead, she rocked on her heels, eyes darting wildly as though searching for an exit that did not exist. The passenger remained silent, unmoving, her shadowed figure blurring into the night as though she had been carved from stone. Dispatch crackled in Daniels's earpiece, asking for an update. His voice came out hoarse, nearly unrecognizable to himself, as he requested homicide to the scene. The suitcase lay open still, its contents undeniable, its silence louder than any siren. Daniels stepped back, his flashlight beam faltering over the shape of tiny limbs, over fabric that clung like shrouds. What had begun as a traffic stop now revealed itself as something far darker. And though he did not yet know it, the night's horror was not finished. There was more hidden in that car waiting to be unearthed. The first suitcase had drained the air from the night, but the officer's duty demanded they press further. Ramirez's hands shook as he steadied his flashlight, its pale circle moving over the trunk's crowded interior. The piles of bags remained, some sealed with tape, others sagging from the weight of what lay within. The odour, already unbearable, seemed to thicken with every shift of air. Nicole pleaded, now her voice hoarse, her body trembling. She begged them to stop, claimed there was nothing else to see. Each word sounded less like denial and more like desperation. Daniels's tone hardened. He ordered her to step aside, his own pulse pounding loud in his ears. They pulled free another bundle heavier than the rest. The plastic stretched as they tugged, and from within came the unmistakable seep of rot, staining the outer layers. Ramirez's breath caught his lips, moving in silence, fragments of prayer falling apart in his mouth. Daniels kept his hands steady, though sweat slid down his spine beneath the weight of the discovery. The bag split with a sharp tear. The flashlight beam fell on fabric children's clothing, soiled and stiff, wrapped around another small form. It was smaller than the first, more recent in its decay, yet unmistakably the same kind of secret the first suitcase had concealed. The silence after was unbearable. Even the cicadas seemed to fade, as if the natural world recoiled from the truth. Ramirez stumbled away, retching into the gutter, while Daniels forced his eyes to remain on the child-sized bundle. His voice rough with disbelief, called dispatch again. "We have 2 victims. Repeat, 2!" Nicole's legs buckled. She collapsed against the side of the car, sobbing, insisting that she had been left alone with responsibility she never asked for. Her words spilled too quickly. Fragments of blame cast in different directions toward poverty, toward her sister, toward fate itself. The passenger shifted at last, her eyes wide, lips trembling. Yet she spoke no defense, no accusation. Only silence, as though locked inside her own unspoken knowledge. When detectives arrived, the scene had hardened into nightmare. 2 children hidden away for months, one perhaps for years. A car that had become their tomb, uncovered by chance on a summer night when all Nicole had done was drive too fast. At headquarters, the story began to splinter. Nicole sat across from detectives, her eyes red, her voice alternately defiant and broken. She insisted the children had not been hers, that she had only tried to care for them after her younger sister abandoned them. Her words carried bitterness, a carefully woven image of a woman left to shoulder burdens she never asked for. The sister Charity, 29 years old, emerged in their investigation as a ghostly figure. She lived in another county, worked sporadically, and had a history marked by instability. In the glare of the interrogation room, Nicole painted her as careless, unfit someone who had thrust children into her care without a thought. Detectives seized on this thread. If Charity had truly abandoned her children, if she had left them in Nicole's custody, then perhaps she bore the greater weight of guilt. The public, hearing fragments of this claim as they leaked into headlines, turned their outrage upon her almost instantly. But the deeper they dug, the less the story aligned. Records showed no official transfer of custody, no documents, no court filings. The children had never been enrolled in school, never seen by a physician. Yet phone records told a different story. They revealed dozens of unanswered texts from Charity, pleas for updates, offers of money, repeated requests to see her children. There were receipts to small transfers of cash through payment apps, always followed by Nicole's excuses. A cold, snapped screenshot. "Not this weekend. They're sick." Another, "We'll come by soon. Don't worry." Patterns of evasion stretched over months, suggesting not abandonment, but deliberate obstruction. Still, suspicion clung to the mother. The GoFundMe page she created in the aftermath drew harsh judgment. Critics saw opportunism, a woman monetizing grief. Even family spoke against her, the children's grandmother, saying both daughters were responsible, that neither had protected Jocelyn and Larry. Detectives, weighed down by the horror of what they had found, struggled to see past these shadows. Charity's absence, her digital presence, filled with pleading words, but not physical visits, made her an easy figure to condemn. Yet beneath the noise, subtle contradictions remained. Why had no neighbour ever seen the children in Nicole's care? And why had Nicole worked so carefully to keep them hidden from sight? The truth was layered, still waiting to surface. While Nicole unravelled in interrogation, detectives turned their attention to the other woman in the car. She had been there the entire time, silent still, her presence like an unanswered question. Her name was Angela. A cousin distantly connected, though, in the community, she was known more for her disability than for any part in family affairs. Angela's body betrayed discomfort the moment she was placed in the interview chair. Her shoulders hunched, her eyes avoided the light. When asked direct questions, her answers were short, sometimes only nods or shakes of the head. The detectives pressed harder. Why had she been in the car that night? What did she know about the bags, the suitcase, the unbearable smell that even seasoned officers could not ignore? Her responses were hesitant, almost childlike. She said she had needed a ride, that Nicole often let her sleep in the car when she had nowhere else to go. She claimed she never looked in the bags, never asked questions. To her, the clutter had been only clutter piles of belongings that meant little in a life where little was ever explained. Still, suspicion sharpened around her. Could she have been complicit? Her silence in the face of the officer's commands, her refusal to glance at the trunk while the remains were uncovered, her stillness so unnatural it appeared almost staged. These details painted her as a possible accomplice. Detectives weighed her against Nicole. Where Nicole spoke too much, Angela spoke too little. Where Nicole's explanations grew tangled, Angela's answers were clipped, almost evasive in their brevity. It seemed impossible that she had sat so close to horror and remained ignorant. Yet the more they pressed, the clearer her boundaries became. Her mental state, fragile and limited, suggested dependency rather than agency. Medical documents confirmed she had long struggled with cognitive disabilities. Friends and neighbours described her as quiet, easily led, often in the background of family gatherings, like a shadow no one noticed. If she had known, she had lacked the ability to act. If she had not known then, her silence was only another tragedy within a larger one. By the end of her questioning, detectives released her, though unease lingered. In a case already defined by hidden truths, Angela remained a figure caught between suspicion and sympathy, her silence neither damning nor fully absolving. When detectives widened their search beyond the car and the women inside it, the community's memories began to surface. Neighbours, once indifferent, now recalled fragments that seemed sinister in retrospect. On a quiet street lined with narrow row houses, a woman named Mrs. Carter remembered never seeing the children outside. Not once, she said, her voice carrying both conviction and guilt. We'd see Nicole come and go, bags in her arms, windows closed tight, even in summer. But not the kids. Never the kids. Another neighbour spoke of muffled sounds through thin walls, crying sometimes sharp thuds against the plaster. When asked why she hadn't called authorities, she lowered her eyes. "You don't want to meddle in family business around here," she whispered. Besides, Nicole always said her nieces were visiting relatives. I believed her. From across the block, a man recalled Nicole's evasiveness. He said he once asked about the children's schooling, concerned that he hadn't seen them walk to the bus stop. Nicole's reply had been curt. "They're homeschooled. Not your concern." The conversation ended there, but the impression lingered. The whispers accumulated a web of overlooked signs. Windows shut against laughter that never came. Trash bags hauled to the curb with a smell sharp enough to sting the air. Locks changed more than once, always, with an urgency that suggested fear or concealment. Suspicion spread quickly. Some muttered that Nicole had always seemed unstable, her temper quick to rise when challenged. Others pointed toward Charity, repeating Nicole's accusation that the mother had vanished from her children's lives. And in quiet corners, some even mentioned the grandmother who had often intervened in family disputes, whose stern hand guided decisions behind closed doors. Yet none of these memories had risen to action until now. The community's silence became its own kind of indictment, a chorus of hindsight, each voice claiming unease, yet admitting they had done nothing. Detectives catalogued each statement, searching for threads of truth among excuses. The neighbours' recollections formed a portrait of neglect that spanned years, but like all portraits, it concealed as much as it revealed. The true story remained locked within the family itself, where words were twisted, motives layered, and guilt was a currency no one wished to hold. The investigation turned to the digital traces left behind, messages that could not be twisted as easily as words spoken under interrogation. Detectives pulled records from Charity's phone, her social media, her payment apps. The evidence spoke in the flat, unchanging tones of timestamps and receipts. Text after text appeared on the screen. "Can I see the kids this weekend? Did Jocelyn get her birthday card? I sent $200. Please tell me they're okay." The messages stretched across months, then years, each one unanswered or met with curt deflections. "Not today. They're sick. We'll come by soon." The pattern was suffocating in its consistency. Charity reached out, pleading for contact. Nicole blocked, delayed, excused. The evidence undercut Nicole's claim that her sister had abandoned the children. On the contrary, the texts painted Charity as someone trying, however imperfectly, to remain connected. Transfers of money confirmed the narrative. Small amounts, $50, $100, dripped into Nicole's accounts, often timed with Charity's inquiries. Each transfer was followed by silence. The money went through, but the visits never did. Detectives presented this to Nicole. She shifted in her chair, eyes darting. She muttered about her sister's instability, her irresponsibility, her lack of seriousness. But the paper trail undermined her words. When pressed, she faltered, her excuses collapsing into anger. The messages also revealed something subtler. Nicole had sent occasional updates, not about the children, but about her own hardships. Car broke down again. Need help with rent. Each message reframed the relationship, placing herself as the victim, the one deserving sympathy. The children's names appeared less and less until they vanished entirely from her words. For detectives, this was the first real fracture in Nicole's defense. The texts showed intent not only to conceal the children, but to manipulate those who might have intervened. Yet they also complicated the picture of Charity. She had sent money, yes. She had begged to visit. But she had not pressed further when refused. Why had no one demanded to see the children face to face? Why had no one knocked on Nicole's door when the excuses piled too high? The digital trail revealed both persistence and passivity. A family circling a problem without ever breaching it. The children had vanished into silence, long before their bodies were found. In the days that followed, the children's grandmother emerged as a steady presence. She arrived at the precinct with a folder of documents in hand. Her posture composed, her tone measured. She spoke of grief, of anger at both her daughters, of the unbearable shame that their family name was now tied to such horror. Detectives, weary from conflicting stories, welcomed her cooperation. She provided photographs of the children's school portraits from years before their smiles frozen in time. She offered addresses, contact numbers, even recollections of arguments between her daughters that might explain their fractured bond. In the chaos of Nicole's unravelling story and Charity's defensive protests, the grandmother's calm guidance seemed almost a relief. But beneath her composure lay peculiar details. In one interview, she corrected a detective about the timing of Jocelyn's last birthday, insisting it had been overlooked years earlier. The precision of her statement drew notice. She spoke as though she had counted each missed year, each unmarked occasion, with deliberate clarity. When asked why she had not intervened more forcefully, she sighed, speaking of her daughter's stubbornness. "They wouldn't listen," she said. "Every time I tried, they shut me out. I couldn't force my way in." It was a plausible excuse, yet it left questions hanging. Neighbours had recalled seeing her at Nicole's house more than once, lingering on the porch, exchanging words too quiet to hear. She condemned both daughters equally, insisting responsibility was shared. But in her even-handed blame, there was also distance and unwillingness to admit how much she herself had known. She had noticed, she admitted that the children were not in school. She had asked once, she said, and Nicole told her they were homeschooled. She had accepted it. The detectives recorded her statements, grateful for the clarity she seemed to provide. Yet in the quiet corners of their notes, some scribbled questions. How had she known so quickly where certain documents were kept? Why had she, before being told, already suspected that there might be more than one child in the car? The grandmother carried herself like a guide through chaos. But her certainty, her tidiness hinted at knowledge that should have been impossible, unless she had already pieced together truths she never confessed aloud. The deeper detectives sifted through testimony, the more inconsistencies sharpened into focus. Nicole's words shifted constantly, her excuses collapsing under the weight of evidence. Charity's record, though imperfect, revealed genuine attempts to stay connected to her children. Angela, the passenger, faded from suspicion entirely. Her disability made her dependent not complicit, but the grandmother's presence lingered like a shadow at the edge of every account. She had been the first to mention that Jocelyn's growth had seemed stunted, though police had not yet released details about the child's emaciated state. She spoke of Larry's fragile health, words that matched descriptions from forensic reports she had not seen. Detectives began combing back through her statements, listening more carefully to what they had overlooked. She had also been precise about dates, the missed birthdays, the year Nicole supposedly took custody, the summer Charity last claimed to have seen her children. Her memory appeared flawless, too flawless. Each detail aligned with the timeline investigators were only just beginning to assemble. Neighbours, when re-interviewed, added pieces they had forgotten. They recalled the grandmother's visits to Nicole's home, sometimes at odd hours, always brief. One neighbour remembered seeing her carry a large plastic bag to her car late at night, her face set in grim determination. And then there were the documents she had produced. Some bore notes in handwriting that matched her own, not Nicole's. School forms that had never been submitted. Doctor reminders, unopened materials she should not have had access to unless she had been inside the house more often than she admitted. The breadcrumbs connected into a path investigators could no longer ignore. Nicole, unstable and defensive, had clearly concealed the children. But the grandmother had known, had perhaps chosen silence, or worse, had lent quiet assistance to keeping them hidden. Her corrections, her precision, her subtle readiness with information no one else possessed, they betrayed familiarity with the darkness Nicole had tried to bury. For years, suspicion had pointed outward, toward the absent mother. the silent passenger, the unstable sister. Yet the truth was that someone else had stood at the periphery, tidy and composed, presenting herself as helper while carrying knowledge too heavy to be innocent. The courtroom echoed with silence as Nicole Johnson was sentenced. 50 years in prison, 14 counts in total. The judge's gavel fell heavy final. Reporters scribbled notes, their headlines already forming, "Aren't convicted in children's deaths." For the public, the story had found its villain. Yet inside the investigation's files, unease remained. Detectives had traced the threads, their notes marked with questions not meant for open court. The grandmother's words, her precision, her hidden visits, all lingered without charges, shadows in the margins. Nicole's guilt was undeniable, but hers was not the only presence that had allowed Jocelyn and Larry to disappear into silence. Outside the courthouse, the grandmother stood with folded hands, her face a mask of grief. Cameras turned toward her, catching the tremor in her voice as she spoke of loss of responsibility shared between both daughters. The public saw a woman crushed by tragedy. Detectives watching from a distance saw the glint of certainty behind her eyes. She had known too much. She had done too little. The city moved on as cities do. The viral body cam footage was replayed, dissected, absorbed into the endless churn of outrage. But for those who had stood at the trunk of that car, who had inhaled the stench of 2 lost lives, the memory did not fade. The case became a reminder not only of what Nicole had done, but of what others had allowed. Neighbours who heard cries but turned away. Relatives who accepted excuses too easily. A grandmother who positioned herself as helper, yet carried knowledge that betrayed complicity. Evil had not worn the mask of a stranger. It had lived within familiar walls, cloaked in respectability, unseen until it was too late. As the files were closed, one detective lingered, staring at the final photographs, 2 small forms reduced to evidence. He thought of their names, Jocelyn and Larry, children, whose voices had never reached the ears of those who might have saved them. As they filed the case away, he whispered a vow beneath his breath never again to overlook the quiet figures who seemed most harmless. As they locked the cabinet, he looked at the photographs one last time. The real journey was just beginning. In the end, that was the lesson: evil might hide behind familiar faces, but vigilance endures. As they moved toward the uncertain future, he squeezed his partner's hand. What if we miss it again? Then we look harder. They stepped toward healing, toward a future they would build one day at a time.
Thank you for listening to Brody's Stories. Until we meet again.